On behalf of the Orange County Interfaith Network, I would like to welcome you to this year's Community Forum series. The purpose of our program is simple. The more you know, the less you fear. Our mission as a network is to connect, promote, and facilitate interfaith engagement, dialogue, and understanding. We define interfaith itself as education via dialogue. Our belief is that from dialogue comes understanding and respect. And from that understanding, we can reach closer to compassion for others. As you can see, this year we have adapted our forum series as a virtual roundtable discussion. We have teamed up with local universities, organizations, and leaders to talk about key issues in our community that are affecting us today. We hope these conversations continue beyond just the screen, and we are empowered with the knowledge we receive from our esteemed panelists today. The goal for OCIN in having such programming is not only to have a better understanding on the subject matter, but as an audience, have the toolkit to be driven towards action. We look forward to these conversations serving as a catalyst for greater understanding and respect for all. And with that, I want to welcome our educational fellow, Natasha Huang, to kick us off and introduce our program today. Natasha, can you take it away?
Thank you, Gagan. The theme for our 2020 Community Forum series is Sharing Our Stories, From Understanding to Action. We want to lift up the importance of recognizing that behind every set of issues is a backdrop of countless individual stories and larger collective narratives. In light of COVID-19, the topic of hate crimes and white supremacy has only become even more relevant. Here at the Orange County Interfaith Network, along with the rest of the world, we have had to adjust the way we engage with these issues, modifying what we had planned as public events to a virtual roundtable discussion. Here to help us moderate tonight's discussion is Dr. Amanda Swain. Amanda Jeanne Swain is the Executive Director of the UC Irvine Humanities Center. She has a PhD in Russian and East European history with a specialization in Soviet history. Amanda has taught college history courses on Europe in World War II, the Holocaust, and commemorating World War II in Europe. Take it away for us, Dr. Swain.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this roundtable, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation with our guests today, because this is an even more important topic, if that's hard to imagine. It's in these times of social and self-isolation, so I'm glad that we're able to have this conversation today. So I would like to thank all of our panelists for participating, and I will briefly introduce them before we begin our discussion. Dr. Pete Simi is a professor of sociology at Chapman University. For the past 25 years, his studies have focused on violent extremism and the social psychology of hate as part of a broader interest in childhood development and how individuals construct personal and collective identities. He is co-author of the award-winning book, American Swastika, Inside the White Power Movement's Hidden Spaces of Hate. Rabbi Peter Levi spent 18 years as a congregational rabbi before becoming the regional director for the Anti-Defamation League's Orange County Long Beach office. The Anti-Defamation League fights anti-Semitism and all forms of bigotry, defends democratic ideals, and protects civil rights for all by responding to hate incidents and working with community partners and providing anti-bias and anti-bullying programs. Peter is the current president of the OC Board of Rabbis and a member of the Orange County Sheriff's Interfaith Advisory Council. Don Hahn is currently operations manager with Orange County Human Relations, where he was previously the Hate Crime Prevention Program Coordinator. Don is a former chair of the OC chapter of GLSEN, which works to ensure that LGBTQ students can learn and grow in a school environment free from bullying and harassment. He is a former Human Relations Commissioner for the city of Santa Ana. Inderpreet Kaur became the Sikh Coalition's Southern California Community Development Manager in January 2018. In this role, she provides direct support to the Sikh community of Southern California in their work to empower community leaders to promote interfaith solidarity, defend civil rights, and raise Sikh awareness. And she was motivated to work at the Sikh Coalition by her passion to advocate for equal human rights and to ensure underrepresented communities have a voice. So I think that we are going to have a really powerful conversation today, and I look forward to hearing from everyone. But I'd like to start first with Pete Simi. And could you begin our conversation with a brief overview of white supremacy? What is this, and what does it look like in the United States today generally?
Yeah, sure. Let me just first thank the network for organizing this and the invitation to be able to participate. I'm looking forward to our discussion. I think it's important to first distinguish between white supremacy as a system and the white supremacist movement. So when you think about the history of the founding of U.S. society in terms of its organization, white supremacy is baked into the cake, more or less. It manifests itself in terms of the institutions, policies, and this continues to be the case today. So it's most probably glaringly visible when you look at the criminal justice system and the racial disparities in the criminal justice system in terms of arrests and convictions and sentencing. We're seeing it now with COVID-19 in terms of the higher mortality rate among African Americans. So that's the institutional aspect of white supremacy. It's the larger context for, I think, what will be the focus of our discussion today, which is the white supremacist movement. But these are deeply connected and intertwined, and we should always remember that these don't exist apart from each other. They feed off of each other. The white supremacist movement, when we think about the history, dates back to essentially the founding of the Ku Klux Klan shortly after the Civil War. And it's ebbed and flowed over time. There's been various iterations of groups like the Klan, and then eventually the emergence of proto-Nazis prior to World War II, and then after World War II, neo-Nazis. You have the emergence of neo-Nazi racist skinheads in the 1980s. You have various religious sects. And then more recently, what we're seeing is kind of a new generation of white supremacists. And some people were surprised to see the images in Charlottesville in 2017 at the Unite the Right rally there with these young folks in polos and khakis. And those images really do represent an effort to kind of rebrand that various white supremacist groups have actually been promoting really for decades, but that we're really seeing kind of come to fruition over the last 5 or so years. And of course, a big part of what we're seeing now with this new generation of white supremacist groups is a real tech savvy aspect and a heavy reliance on social media. And so you can find these folks on mainstream platforms like Twitter and Facebook, but then they also gravitate towards more kind of extremist oriented platforms like Gab or Telegram. And this is a space that they utilize to promote their messaging, to create narratives, to try and dominate and control kind of rhetoric and how issues are viewed. And again, to try and get their message out to as wide a swath of the population as possible in order to kind of, influence folks. Now, there's that component that's important in terms of the messaging and how they're trying to essentially kind of create certain messages and narratives. But then the other part is, of course, the violence that we see with these folks. And we see this obviously in recent years with the terror attack in El Paso at the Walmart. We've seen multiple synagogues attacked by white supremacists. Of course, we saw Dylan Roof attack an African-American church in South Carolina. We go back to 2012 and the Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, that a white supremacist attacked. So this, of course, is a type of violence. It has a long history in our country, but we're again seeing a new generation of folks gravitate towards this strategy and really use it as a means to try and essentially bring the collapse of the system, to essentially fight what they call a race war. And so this is essentially where we're at. In many ways, there's not a whole lot new in what we're seeing. We've seen this problem, and the toxic mix that makes up this problem for a long time. But there certainly are kind of new trends and so forth. But a lot of it is kind of old stuff and kind of old wine in new bottles, so to speak.
So we have this ongoing issue with or ongoing violence, and yet also this attempt to use and adjust to new tools and new opportunities. And our other panelists are really involved in the on-the-ground work with communities who are the targets of these attacks. And so I'd like to ask them to tell us about hate crimes in Orange County against their communities. How have hate crimes changed either in number or in method? In particular, most recently, as we are in this time of pandemic. And so, Don, would you start by talking about your community?
Sure, thank you. Definitely, as Dr. Simi mentioned that, unfortunately, like many other community in the United States or around, the white supremacists always been a part of Orange County throughout our history, and the wave of hate crime committed by this group or the different groups of white supremacist group in Orange County, it had its ups and downs, but unfortunately, in the last 4 or 5 years or so, it had been quite a bit of an increase in our community. In relating to the COVID-19, definitely we have seen some rises in the activities, particularly in hate incidences that are targeting our AAPI community here in Orange County. Since January of this year, we have documented 60% increase in hate incidents related to COVID-19. So we're no exception to different communities that are experiencing the rise in hate in terms of, maybe Peter Levy gonna emphasize on this later on in terms of even anti-Semitic that are increasing because the white supremacist group are using some of these opportunity to scapegoating or targeting group that are they creating a propaganda to say that, oh, it's the Chinese virus, or these are the issues that now really targeting a minority group and using that platform to, in a lack of a better term, blame games on how these violence should be committed towards our community. So.
Yes, and I know that's been obviously nationally a problem, as well as here in Orange County with increased attacks against the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Inderpreet, can you tell us about the Sikh community?
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. I will lay the foundation down just to speak a little bit about what our history and what hate crimes have looked like in the Southern California area since the early 2000s. As you all know, a lot of South Asian communities and Middle Eastern communities were under fire and experienced a lot of negativity after 2001 because of the 9/11 attacks. And because of that, we did see a huge rise of hate crimes that were being reported. Now, we don't know if these events, if our hate crime percentages had doubled during that time, because before, not too many people were reporting hate crimes or hate crime incidents weren't as dangerous as they became after 9/11. And so we did see that post 9/11, a lot more Sikhs, a lot more South Asians came forward to share their story and what their experience had been like in the post 9/11 world. And just recently, about a few years ago, the FBI started recording data on Sikhs. So if a Sikh individual was to report a hate incident or hate crime, they would be reported, or they would be labeled as, a Sikh individual had reported, instead of saying, oh, you know, a South Asian community member had come forward. Before, we didn't have our own category, and fortunately now, if we were to ever report a hate crime, we do have a certain list going that this Sikh individual had gone through a hate incident. So we do have certain percentages now that we can report back. And now, while that the FBI found that hate crimes nationwide remained relatively consistent between 2017 and 2018, there were a few really important trends that we saw in the Sikh community. And the first one was that, you know, the Sikh Coalition and the Sikh American community saw that anti-Sikh hate crimes increased by 200%, while other communities were either underreporting or were not reporting at all. And then in addition, you know, now that Sikhs are being documented by the FBI, we saw that the Sikh community was the third most frequently targeted religious group behind the Jewish and Muslim community. So we did see a huge rise in numbers after the FBI started recording our experiences. And now we're able to also learn back and go back and see, you know, what had caused this. You know, and it could be the political kind of climate. It could be, you know, where folks are residing, depending on what area it is. I'd see a lot of that. And one, you know, event that I can think of on top of my head, we saw that the Buena Park Gurdwara, our house of worship, was tagged a few years ago by white supremacists, leaving very negative comments on our walls. And thankfully, we were able to find who was responsible for that action, and, you know, educate them on who we are and also learn why they did what they did. And during this pandemic, we have not seen a rise in hate crimes, I would say, in the Sikh community. And it's probably because a lot of our frontline workers are healthcare folks, and they have not been reporting anything. A lot of our community members also are taxi drivers or Uber drivers, and they're not in, you know, they're not working as much as they are usually, so they're not experiencing as much, you know, face-to-face time with other members of society. But we will say that the number is still pretty consistent. I wouldn't say that anything has gone significantly down. I'm sure that there is still a lot of issues out there, but there is a lot of underreporting going on. And one way, you know, we've been trying to tackle this issue is taking our, you know, educating our children about who Sikhs are, and starting in classrooms first. So we make sure that we can, you know, we can just distinguish hate at an earlier age.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting to think about, that the incidence of hate crime also is reflected not just in, can be reflected in the fact that people actually aren't out and about. So if you have people not out doing their work, for example, as taxi drivers, that they are going to be less vulnerable to attack in that instance. But that doesn't mean that the amount of hate crimes have reduced. Peter Levy, can you tell us about your community?
And identify strongly with all sorts of marginalized groups, be it religious or ethnic, as Jews often see themselves as a religious and an ethnic group. And we also recognize that when we see increases in anti-Semitism, as either hate crimes or just anti-Semitic incidents, we know that that's something like the canary in the coal mine, that when that piece of the hate pie is growing, that all incidents of hate are growing against marginalized groups in the community. And we've seen, particularly, you know, in the Jewish community, a sustained increase in anti-Semitic incidents since 2016. So we're in 4 years now of sustained increases, a more than doubling in 2 years. Then we're sort of plateauing at the top, which doesn't feel great. And I think when the 2019 numbers come out, we'll actually see a slight increase again, particularly with a lot of the just egregious anti-Semitic activity and deadly activity that we saw, particularly in the New York, New Jersey area, but it really, it carried throughout the country. So the Jewish community is really feeling targeted, vulnerable. The levels of anxiety and security have, we've never experienced in the past. It's interesting when we work in ecumenical interfaith arenas. I've never been to a church that's had armed security, and I've never been to a synagogue that didn't have one. And those anomalies of even just understanding within our own community what is necessary for people to have a sense of comfort and safety within their own houses of worship. And certainly, I think for the Jewish community and the Muslim community, and certainly the Sikh community has been targeted for a variety of reasons. It's a whole different reality of what it means to go to our houses of worship, to gather with our ethnic groups. So while we've seen these pieces, so what we're seeing here in Orange County, we see swastika vandalism all over the place. We see it in schools. We see it in parks. We see it on college campuses. In fact, just last month, there was 2 swastikas in an apartment building on the inside where 20 Holocaust survivors live. Do we think that was random? No, too coincidental. We've seen bricks thrown through synagogue sanctuary windows. Last month, feces were thrown at another Jewish community building. And these are, unfortunately, normalized. This is what we experience all over the place. What might be particularly disturbing is the volume of incidents that we have in our K-12 public schools. It is unbelievable. It happens on sports fields. It happens between peers. It happens written in textbooks, scratched in bathroom walls. It is the volume of it can't even be measured. The anti-Semitic and Holocaust jokes, the swastikas, and that it's really becoming normalized, that hate symbols, and whether or not, I don't know, we can't say that these kids are necessarily part of the white power movement, but what they've done is they've normalized these hate expressions that sets a foundation for individuals who may escalate it. And we've had way too many incidents here in Orange County over this past year that got shared on social media and caught not just national press, but international press. And those were just the ones that were caught. Which is really just the tip of the iceberg. We know this is happening so much more often. So yeah, I don't want to give you concrete examples of the Holocaust jokes that people are reporting to the ADL. And when we try and work with schools and administrators by providing all sorts of anti-bullying and harassment and really diversity programming. It's been referenced that there's been massive white power movement recruiting going on. I counted 56 incidents in 2019 of propaganda and recruitment efforts. And I'm sure Dr. Simi could talk about it on Chapman. We count as one incident when 150 stickers showed up about a La Frontera border exhibit across department program that the school was running. But that's just one incident, but it was literally well over 100 stickers that were put all over posters on campus. So we're seeing this on every college campus, and the overwhelming majority of our community colleges too have received this type of recruiting, which has been a massive increase. 2019 had the highest propaganda and recruiting efforts that we had ever recorded in the history. White supremacists feel that this is their time, and they are particularly looking for disaffected white males on campuses. That is their target group. And they seize any opportunity. So with immigration policies, They seize on immigration to spin the conspiracy theories and target marginalized groups. And there typically is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that supports the targeting of Mexicans and Mexican Americans and the Latinx community in El Paso, or even the horrific murders in New Zealand was based on anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, as well as the immigration policy was blamed on the Jewish community, which led to the two murderous acts, one an hour south of us in San Diego, which was just a year ago, and then a year and a half ago, the deadliest recorded anti-Semitic incident in American history in Pittsburgh. Which brings us to the coronavirus situation, which is once again another opportunity to spread the hate and the vitriol. And we're seeing this from sort of the right-wing white power movements. The spinning of memes, conspiracy theories has really gone through the roof. And we're going to share in a moment one chart of the Jewish community, but it's been even more horrific to the Asian community, sort of the Pan-Asian community and the Chinese community, but all religious groups, all immigrants have really been folded into a lot of the coronavirus. So we could share, I just have 2 slides to share with you now. All right, I'm not seeing them quite yet. There they are. So if just the coronavirus and anti-Semitism, if you look at the picture on your left, you see sort of the idea of a Trojan horse with the coronavirus as the head. And you see what's a stereotypical and meme of a stereotypical Jew. It's actually known as the Happy Merchant. It is viral on 4chan and in the white supremacist universe. And you get this idea of coming out of the globe, of this globalization is Jews are responsible for that, for taking over the world, and that there's actually these conspiracy theories how the Jews have manufactured the virus in order to make money on it and to rewrite the world order. On the right, you see one where an up close of the virus, where the virus is actually the Jews themselves are the virus. So it's not just the coronavirus, it's the Jewish population is the virus that is undermining the world. And sort of obviously the lockdowns and the policies all become part spinning of these conspiracy theories about undermining America. And, this isn't just America, but in those. So if we can have the next slide. So that's sort of an anti-Semitic. And then we also see a weaponization and the next slide, and I'm just sharing a few other memes that are out there. And you see this, right? If you have the bug, give a hug, spread the flu to every Jew. If you get infected, right, go visit your synagogue, hug as many people, cough on the doorknobs and the handles. And this is I'm sharing the anti-Semitic ones, but I could have pulled ones that were anti-Chinese or anti-Asian and anti-Muslim, an anti-immigrant, an anti-Mexican. It is out there in every capacity, but there does tend to be sort of an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that supports that. So that's enough of the slides. Another thing we're seeing is the Zoom bombing. Once again, opportunity. UCI, when the first public thing that they had, UC Irvine, when they came back after spring break, they were Zoom bombed in a anti-Semitic and racist and misogynistic notion. Were they white supremacists? Hard to say. They didn't really actually sound like it. It sounded like more people trying to be provocative and undermine what was happening. But at the same time, we have well-documented cases of well-known white supremacists Zoom bombing, actually in a picture like this, and opening of the shirt and showing swastika tattoos to the entire Zoom meeting. So these are the type of incidents that we are seeing. And very recently, we have seen in the protests, the anti-lockdown protests, we've also seen a number of anti-Semitic amongst other anti-marginalized group incidents. Most egregiously in Columbus, Ohio, outside the state house, the state capitol, there was a sign with that resembled like an Israeli flag that talked about the real plague and had sort of a rat with a Jewish star and that same stereotypical face that you saw in the other meme coming out. We've had elected officials, make grossly inappropriate Nazi comparisons to the lockdown. And what all this does is it either perpetuates anti-Semitism or it normalizes this type of rhetoric, which sets a stage, which empowers and emboldens the white supremacists and neo-Nazis that are in our midst.
Thank you, Peter. I actually, the event that was Zoom bombed at UCI, that was an event that our group, the UCI Humanities Center was one of the co-organizers, and I was on that event, and it was horrible. It was a horrible experience. We were attacked, and it did very much feel like a violent attack, even though it was a virtual attack. It was racist, misogynist, and vicious.
Sure.
And we have seen recruiting on the UCI campus as well. The stickers in February, there was we within the Humanities Quad reported them to the police, have them taken down. We've had incidences of if not physical assault, definitely verbal assault against our Asian American Pacific Islander students on campus since the COVID-19 virus. So I certainly know from experience how this pandemic has opened up even more opportunities for these kinds of hate incidences and activity by white, actual sort of, I guess, officially white nationalists, as well as white nationalist adjacent kind of groups. So Pete Simi, could you tell us more? We've heard about what's been happening here in specifically in Orange County, but this is nationwide, and Peter Levy was referring to some of that. What specifically is this, the COVID-19 impact on recruitment? How is it shaping or challenging white nationalist ideology, white supremacist ideology? Are there specific things that we should be alert to right now when we're watching the news, when we're seeing things come across our social media now at this time?
Yeah, well, over the last 25 years, I've spent a lot of time embedded in white supremacist groups in order to learn about their culture and in order to grasp a better idea of things that might be more effective in terms of intervention and prevention. And more recently have been immersed in various social media platforms, like where some of those memes came from in terms of Telegram and Gab and others. And one of the things I've learned over the years is that I think I think there's kind of some misconceptions about white supremacists, that the individuals who are attracted to these groups are predominantly or exclusively poorly educated, kind of down on their luck, and not very sophisticated. And what we find actually is that, individuals, you do have individuals that kind of fit that profile, if you want to call it that, but you have a really wide spectrum of individuals who are attracted to the messages in these types of groups. And they come from a broad cross-section in terms of socioeconomic status and education. You have professionals who are involved in these groups that are highly educated, and you have wealthy folks that are involved in these groups. So there is quite a bit more sophistication than I think sometimes we acknowledge about these folks and some of their strategies and techniques. And one of the things that I think they've been pretty effective at doing over the years is that they take advantage of issues, hot button issues that are bound to cause some emotional discontent within the larger population. So whether it's issues about related to immigration or affirmative action, or now this global pandemic, they are good about seizing on these issues and trying to figure out ways to frame them in certain ways that are of benefit to them. And as part of that, one of the things they've been able to do over the years is, in some ways, it's like you have the movement, but then you have things that are associated with the movement that they can distribute and kind of circulate in the wider population in a way that it's somewhat becomes disassociated from them specifically. But though that circulation has an influence on the population. And so, for instance, if you think about immigration and the word invasion, that's a term that they use, you know, going way back to describe immigration. And, you know, they, among other factors, you know, their promotion of that kind of messaging has helped that become a much more kind of mainstream way of talking about immigration as an invasion, such that we even hear, you know, we have a president who uses that kind of terminology to describe it. So, you know, the kinds of things we see among young people that Peter was referencing, that, you know, they may not be involved in any kind of group specifically, but they're essentially mimicking white supremacist groups, and they're using their symbols and icons and other kind of talking points, if you will. And so that really does spread the influence of the movement in a way that's, it's even hard to really fully appreciate. And so I expect that with COVID-19, we're going to continue to see that kind of effort. And unfortunately, I think they're going to have some success around that. One of the things is we need more awareness about how they code certain messages. So some of the anti-Semitism that you see circulating, it won't specifically necessarily reference anything direct in terms of anti-Semitism, but they'll talk about, for instance, Bill Gates. If you trace his family history back far enough, he's connected to the Rothschild family. Well, essentially that's code word in white supremacist speak for quote unquote the Jew. Or they talk about this fake speech that Henry Kissinger never gave in 2009 to the World Health Organization, where he supposedly said that he wanted to force vaccinations on people so that we can control the herd. Again, this speech never happened, but it's significant that they choose Kissinger because, again, he's stand-in for quote unquote the Jew. So then people who may not view themselves as anti-Semitic or even associate with, you know, any kind of white supremacist groups specifically, may still be kind of susceptible to that kind of messaging because they don't even fully realize what it is that they're kind of getting at with some of this. And so they may be willing to, for instance, repost it on you know, various social media accounts like Facebook. And I've seen this personally, where I've seen people repost white supremacist propaganda without even realizing that that's what they were essentially helping circulate. So I think there's a lot of need for more kind of awareness and education about some of the subtleties and some of the kind of sophisticated strategies that these folks are engaged in.
Thank you. Yeah, I do think that this is particularly a time when we are perhaps even more on social media as we are physically isolated, and being aware of some of these coded messages is particularly important, and being able to see what's out there and recognize it for what it is. And I know that these are really serious national concerns, and they're also very serious local concerns, and the organizations that our panelists represent are actively involved in both serving people who have been affected by hate incidences, but also involved in the community to be involved in this kind of education. So I'd like to ask each of them to talk about what your organizations are doing right now, if there's anything that you've implemented in particular in response to COVID-19 and the self-isolation situation that we're in, and how someone can get help if they've been a victim of a hate crime. And Don, I'd like to start with you and OC Human Rights.
Thank you. Definitely, one of the first things we started doing is reaching out to all of our impacted community, the API community. We started personally just having our staff and our colleague and our allies start reaching out, because reaching out to people matters, because when the community feel vulnerable, sometimes they don't know where to go. And taking the time to reach out just to check in to say, hey, how are you doing? Is there anything we could do to support you? And also bringing awareness that we are here to support anyone who have been impacted by hate crime or hate incidents. And we started to launch some campaign, and I'm gonna have Natasha share the flyer that we created through social media and through our website. It's called We Stand Up Against Hate. And we challenge people throughout Orange County or even internationally. We just had a follower in Italy that actually created We Stand Against Hate challenge on her and her home, just to share that there's a lot of good things that's happening, but we also don't accept and tolerate hate crime or hate incident that's happening in our community. We feel strongly to send a message to folks that are thinking that this is the opportunities for them to spread hate, that no, this is not going to happen in our own backyard. We're not going to tolerate it. And Orange County is better than that, right? The world's better than that. So we are standing and united to support one another. So that's one of the things that we started doing right away, is to start putting the message out there, and also to start continue to educate and bring awareness to our community about what is hate crime and what is hate incidents, and if someone is being targeted or impacted, to contact us, or if they're in danger, immediately call and report that to their local law enforcement. And we also sharing some resources of how to support one another in our own community. We still continue to encourage people, like, for example, on April 30th, next week, we're launching a statewide Day of No Hate. So this is different organization, different community, different schools is gonna launch that. It's a Day of No Hate. So we're supporting that type of work throughout California. And so if we know someone who have been impacted and report that hate crime or hate incident to our agency, we reach out to the person within hours, or for sure it's within 24 hours, just to make sure that that person is getting the right assistance and the right support. And we continue to do that. And luckily for us, we have folks like ADL and other organizations, and folks like Professor Simi, who are behind this hate crime prevention network that have been supporting the work in Orange County.
Thank you. And Peter Levy, what kinds of activities or things that is the Anti-Defamation League taking on? And make sure to unmute yourself first.
Oh, there I go. Okay. ADL's doing a lot, actually, right now. We're always doing a lot, but particularly right now. We have mentioned about people being informed, having knowledge about what's going on. Then they could be activists, then they could be allies, then they know not to be indifferent and stand up when they hear or see off-colored comments that belittle marginalized people, whether or not it's the American, Asian, Pacific Islander community or other minorities or immigrants. So we've created a Fighting Hate from Home, which is a weekly webinar that's attracted thousands of people throughout the country, really educating and addressing these issues and letting people know about it. Last week's actually had the lead technical officer from Zoom on that, because ADL has been working for years now with the internet platforms, which has become the new platform for hate, right? No one's burning crosses on lawns anymore. They're burning up the internet. That's where it's happening. So we've been working, trying to understand the depth and breadth of hate and how that operates for recruiting and incentivizing and radicalizing people. So when we saw the Zoom bombing phenomenon, ADL went straight into action to help Zoom understand the depth of it and change their protocols and roll out new practices to help avoid that. So that's just sort of one example. Education, where we are. Education is a key piece to something that Pete mentioned about how we see it, so there's the volume of it in kids. And I talked about just normalizing it. But we have to understand that when, and it's a small percentage that actually goes on to some murderous action. But when we look at what happened in South Carolina at the Mother Emanuel Church, or we look at what happened in Poway, when we look what happened in El Paso, these are teens or early 20s. None of these kids woke up and decided to murder someone that day. It started years before, when they were in high school, when they were in middle school, when they hung out in these chat rooms, when they shared memes that they thought were funny, when they started getting triggered by the political correct universe, when they exist in online echo chambers that normalize their hate, and they actually think they're heroes. And then at some point down the line, they move to act. We know this painfully in Orange County when a 19-year-old who was involved with one of the most horrific, violent, anti-Semitic, racist, white power groups that has international stretch, murdered an acquaintance of his from high school, who was home from college. They were both 19 years old at the time. So kids just don't think it's a joke or spread hate, right? They are actually instigators of murder. So we have to be training teachers early on how to recognize this, how to step in, how to never let it normalize, to practice what we say, zero indifference. So the ADL, this is one of our most, our biggest leg of the tripod proactively is running education programs, workshops, professional development days for teachers in how to recognize hate and incidents, how to manage bias, how to be an ally, bullying prevention programs. So we do this for students, we do this for teachers. Right, so that's a really important thing, and we're trying to, and now we're trying to figure out, because we do those in person, we're retooling that to be able, in this temporary stay at home, how we can do that effectively, that type of education online, so that, because it's as relevant now as it's ever been, and the coronavirus opportunity just teaches that all the more so. So there's a key piece of what we do. ADL also is the largest non-governmental organization in the country training law enforcement, and we train law enforcement in hate and extremism. They might learn all sorts of the protocols and how to keep the community safe, but they don't know who are the actors in their communities. What are the methodologies of different extremist groups on the right and left, and the domestic terrorist groups. So ADL, we do a lot of education and training and convening and cooperating and report writing that we share with intelligence officers and law enforcement. Because we're a civilian organization, we don't need a criminal predicate to collect information. So we collect a lot of information, and then and we share that with law enforcement so that they have background, so they have understanding, and then we'll provide expert witness and whatever is needed so they can do their efforts. And in fact, since a year and a half ago when we had the Pittsburgh incident, I think there's been about 15 or 16 white supremacist violent actions that have been prevented before they occurred. And ADL's intelligence has been actively involved in 4 of those. So when we find things, we turn them over to law enforcement. So there's And once again, and those are just 2 or 3 of the ways. We have a dozen other ways from, and the key thing that I think I just want to reiterate what Dawn said is reporting. Everyone needs to report every incident. Reporting creates data. Data drives policy. And we need to change our policies in our world. So we do a lot of advocacy on hate crime legislation, on training, and on reporting legislation. And right now we're trying to really fill in the gaps of the lack of hate crime legislation online, because online hate has real world consequences and existing laws don't adequately cover the online sphere.
Thank you, Peter. Inderpreet, tell us about what your organization is doing right now in this COVID-19 world.
Yeah, it was great to hear from Rabbi Levi and Dawn, because it's very interesting how our work is very similar, working in these community organizations. So we are in very early conversations to see how can we support our communities, not just the Sikh community, but the API community, Jewish community, Muslim communities, and other minorities, on how can we stand in solidarity during this time. How can we be even more well connected than we were when we were meeting each other face to face. So we're learning more about that and working within our interfaith circles to see how we can bring that outcome. And in addition to that, we're also working on a lot of youth projects. We see that even though kids are not going to school right now, bullying is still an issue. Cyberbullying is on the rise because kids are on their phone more. School is also on their laptops and on the internet. So we are trying to educate parents and teachers on how to recognize when bullying is happening, and also educate teachers on, what it means to be a Sikh child, what it means to look very different in their classroom and not look like, quote unquote, the average American. And so those are things that are on the rise right now that we're working with in the education world. And in addition to that, we're also trying to communicate with our Sikh community what their rights are. This is an important time to remind them that, you do have rights. If there is a hate incident in the community, it usually affects the whole community and not just that one person. And what to do if you are a part of a hate incident, who do you report to? And Sikh Coalition also has an in-house legal team that helps folks, just fight for their rights. If there's an issue that a child is going through in school, and unfortunately educators or teachers have not helped the situation, we are able to step in to provide resources and help. If somebody is facing workplace discrimination at this time, or just bias-based discrimination because of their faith, they're able to reach out to us as well. So we do have a lot of online resources, and we're still creating new resources given the pandemic. And we're also, trying to check in with community members. I think what Dawn said, really resonated with me, because it's important to remind community members that, hey, even though we're not seeing each other face to face as often as we used to, especially since, lots of Sikhs go to house of worship at least once or twice a week, they don't have that community anymore. So that feeling of loneliness is starting to creep in a lot of community members, especially, the elderly and those who live alone. But checking in on them and reminding them that if something does happen, we are here for them, even though whether it's happy times or sad times or, this crisis, we're here for them. So that's a very important reminder, and just to ensure that we are still a community, even though we are not seeing each other as often.
Yeah, and I think that the Orange County Interfaith Network really is about making that community deeper and wider. And I think we feel that very strongly right now. I certainly know, as someone who lives alone and depends very much on my particular faith community of my Episcopal church, but also the broader interfaith community and my community of where I work and the friends. that it's, I think that we feel also more vulnerable when we're not with our community. And so as we're looking at this time of global health crisis, when many people do feel even more anxious and unsafe, I'd like to ask each of you to share a piece of advice or encouragement or an action that you would like to leave our audience with as they seek to be and do good in the world, but also just to feel more safe and calm for themselves. So Inderpreet, would you like to share something with us?
Sure. I think one thing that, and I won't take credit for this, this is actually another community member who called me earlier this week, told me, is to remain confident and to remain true to yourself. It is very, very important that if they see any injustice in their community, to speak up, whether it's towards their own community or another minority community. It's very important to speak up about what's happening and encourage them to report and let others know what has happened.
Thank you. Yes, I do. I think that even though we aren't always in community, we are still the eyes of and ears of the world. Pete, Simi, what would you like to leave our audience with?
Yeah, I guess, one thing I would say is that what may seem like a small thing can matter a lot. Putting a sign up in your front window that you stand against hate. It requires you print it out, and while obviously it doesn't solve the problem, that can make a difference. Those kind of things, when you start combining these may seem like small things together, they have ripple effects. And so any opportunity that we have to do something like that is helpful. Part of this is difficult given how much we have to be isolated from each other because of social distancing. But finding ways to speak out when you do see things online, for example. And if you have friends or relatives that are helping perpetuate the kind of hatred we've been talking about, trying to find ways of communicating with them to see if there's any opportunities for them to maybe see things from a different vantage point. I think those kind of opportunities are critical.
Peter Levy, what last comment would you like to share?
I'd say never be indifferent, whether or not it's online or in the real world. Don't be a bystander, don't be indifferent. It's an opportunity to educate, to support those who are marginalized, and be an ally.
Yeah, I like that phrase, zero indifference. I'm gonna keep that in mind. And Don Han, what would you like to leave our audience with?
Stay connected and be vigilant on what type of work you can support locally and globally, and make sure that you are aware what's happening around you and your community, and be connected and support nonprofit or organization that combating hate in our own community, because if a person can't be there in person, but like you said earlier today, if something that we could take away from this is learn how to make things happen virtually, right? So making sure we stay active, and because the other end is not stopping. They are as active or more active, so we need to be more active than usual, and making sure that no hate incident or hate crime happen on our watch.
Thank you all for participating on this panel. I really appreciate that you took the time, but even more so, I appreciate the work that you are doing for your communities. And we look forward to continuing to partner together as we stand up against hate. And also, I wish you all to stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you so much for being a great host.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Once again, we want to thank our fantastic moderator, Dr. Swain, for giving up her own time and energy to moderate this wonderful panel with our speakers. So thank you so much again, Dr. Swain. And I'm going to turn it over to our program director once more. Gagandeep, take it away.
Thank you, everyone. Again, our esteemed panelists for being a part of this forum series. We cannot express how grateful Orange County Interfaith Network is to have such amazing organizations like Orange County Human Relations, Anti-Defamation League, Sikh Coalition, and of course, Chapman University and UC Irvine being a part of this collaboration. Now more than ever, it is really important to spread knowledge and spread knowledge that will be a driving force towards action and creating a more compassionate world. We're again really grateful to Natasha Huang and Amanda Swain for their hard work and dedicated enthusiasm. I want to recognize our president, Mike Penn, who serves as our board president, to continue the guidance and mentorship. And with that, if for our audience, if you want to continue to support Orange County Interfaith Network, and learn more about our activities, please check us out at ocinterfaith.org or like us on Facebook /OCInterfaith. The mission of OC Interfaith Network is to create and support Orange County Interfaith learning opportunities and present united faith-based responses to social justice issues while encouraging respect, civility, and the common good. We look forward to seeing all of you again at our next forum series coming up very soon. So stay tuned. And with that, thank you.